today for another inspiring episode of In the Name of Service. I'm your host, Dr. Barb Thompson. As a United States Army veteran and operational psychologist, I've spent my career working with military and law enforcement units, conducting in-depth interviews with hundreds of individuals who are hoping to earn their place on high-risk, high-performing teams. In most cases, they've already put in years of grueling physical and mental work just to get the chance to serve and sacrifice more. And that type of selflessness is special, and I feel worthy of recognition. While each person's story is unique and every path to service different, their goals are similar. To do something more, to be part of something bigger, to make a difference. These difference makers were the catalyst behind this podcast, and it is my absolute privilege to share their stories with you. And today I get to introduce another one, Michael Halterman. What do you like to be called? Halty? It's so fun to say, but I feel like sometimes you gotta know
all
a
my
person
friends
a
call me
little better.
Halty.
Okay, awesome.
No, jump right in. There's always like 5 or 6 Mikes or Michaels in the room, so Halty just cuts through the noise.
And it's fun to say. Okay. So we met virtually. I was trying to stand up a transition program at my last unit. And I reached out to you randomly on LinkedIn, and you were so polite. And our unit ended up forming a relationship with your organization, and it has gone on to grow into something that is very beneficial for our unit members and even just kind of people in that local area. So it's been really awesome. We've spoken a little bit, and I know a little bit about your background in starting in the Marines infantry and getting into SOF. But why don't you're going to do it better than me. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So, small town kid, grew up on the Central Coast of California, playing team sports and then doing a lot of individual sports. So it kind of gave me a good balance. And then as I was getting done with high school, that I barely made it through, if I'm going to be quite honest with you, I took those really poor student skills. I took those really poor student skills into my first attempt, I will call it, at college. And it went really poorly, just like you would expect, because they're not going to push you through or let you slide by. So college blew up. And at some point I realized I'm a small town kid with not a lot of choices. And there's a big, bright possibility of the world out there that I wanted to go experience. And it wasn't going to happen in my small town, as nice as it was. So I joined some friends. I had a couple of friends that were ahead of me in high school that had joined the Marine Corps. And so I did that. And, in your youth, or at least for me in my youth, I joined for adventure, quite honestly. Service and those things came later. But I joined as an infantryman. Yeah, I joined as an infantryman right away. And I really scratched and fought to be an infantryman because I really felt like that's where I wanted to be. Little did I know how miserable and yet wonderful it would be at the same time. So I did about 10 years as an infantryman from the late 90s. For context, on 9/11, I was on patrol in Kosovo when 9/11 happened, which was just absolutely surreal. And then, a few short years later, I found myself as part of the invasion force as an infantryman, doing the long 3-day, 2.5-day, at least 3-day march from Kuwait all the way up to, we ended up in Al Naziriyah, third largest city in southern Iraq. So I got my first combat experience there. And when I was standing on a rooftop, literally had been in country a month, standing on a rooftop, doing Firewatch, like real Firewatch finally for the first time. I basically watch a special operations night raid unfold kind of in front of me, a couple of clicks in front of me. And so like I'm on these old like monocular, like whatever 7 deltas or whatever they were back then. So I didn't see a lot, but I could make out the gist of it. And I thought, I'm loving my combat experience and I love what I do, but whatever that was, like, I've got to go be a part of that. I have no idea what that was, but that was some of the cool stuff I've ever seen. So that just really changed my mindset and really started making me hunt for what is that next thing and really search it out. Mind you, this is before Google. Like, it was really hard to figure all of that stuff out. You had to talk to humans. Yeah. I had to talk to humans, and you can imagine how popular someone is when they say, I want to leave here and go somewhere else. Marine Corps first sergeants don't take that too well. So I
No.
became very popular for the wrong reason. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I
But there
found
had to be
myself
more of
just
you,
right
right? Were
time,
you
right
alone?
place.
Yeah. Right time, right place. Were you
At
alone
that
in that?
time,
Okay.
a lot of the guys were, my peer group was trying for things like scout snipers, which ironically just folded. That's completely gone away. The last graduating class is happening here in a couple of days. And then some
Hmm.
guys had gone to recon. So we had seen some of those things, but no one had really made the leap to special operations. Um, but it just put me in a different path, and it made me train much, much harder and prepare myself mentally in a very different way. And I found myself, because of my preparedness and a little bit of luck, right time, right place when MARSOC started in 2007 on the West Coast, and I got the opportunity to join. And I spent the next 10 years, so about 10 years in the infantry and then 10 years in special operations being a raider before we were even allowed to call ourselves raiders. Um, got to do 3 back-to-back trips to Afghanistan, did, the stereotypical J sets and CNTs and those things. And it was absolute blast. I really, really enjoyed it.
Is there one experience that stands out above the rest as you reflect on it?
Mm. Thinking back to the really early days of just getting to a unit that really didn't know how it was going to structure itself, and
Mm.
what it was going to call itself, and what uniforms it was going to wear, and what weapons it was going to use, and kind of everything was up for decision making at all levels. What I didn't realize was I was learning the entrepreneurial mind in the moment. And it would seem to
Yeah.
me that the guys who adapted the best and stuck around and really excelled are all tremendously capable entrepreneurs if they so decide, and some of them decided
Mm.
to, and they're great at it. So the adaptability, the endless decision making that comes with kind of that time and space was just an amazing growth opportunity. So I'm really thankful for that
Right.
opportunity. And it it really made the rest of my career something uniquely special that I wouldn't have experienced anywhere else.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Okay, I want to kind of press rewind if that's okay. So you
Yeah,
mentioned you other
absolutely.
guys initially when you were, infantry, were going in other directions
Hmm.
and you wanted to do the really hard stuff. Um,
Hmm.
Describe for us a little bit of your upbringing. I know you said you grew up in a small town. Do you feel like there's a few
Hmm.
experiences or people that like shaped that in you?
Mm. Yeah, I would say qualitatively, right? I'm an N of one, but through the conversations I've had with many of the guys that I look up to, my peers, guys I've been on teams with, almost all of us come from broken homes. And we come,
Yeah.
or
Oh,
some pretty
right.
extreme circumstances in our upbringing. So that seems to be a commonality. Now, look, I didn't have it bad. I feel very fortunate the way I grew up. My parents were divorced very early on, which made its own interesting, which I feel lucky, quite honestly. My mom was very
Mm,
open minded, science, read books, and my dad was very conservative, Protestant Christian values. And so I understand both of those worlds very well. And that is a
yeah.
good swath of America. So those are really good
Mhm.
perspectives to hold in my head and be a part of.
Mhm.
So it allows me, I feel like most times, to be much more adaptable in some social situations or in other situations where it doesn't, it all feels pretty normal to me. And then growing up just kind of in California with the opportunities to be outdoorsy all year round, being able to hike, climb mountains, all of the ride horses and all of these things, just having the experience to be out wild and free before helmets were mandatory for everything, um, really, really gives you, the ability to grow up adventurous and seek more adventure, I think, in some ways
Yeah.
as you get older and more confident. So, and I had an amazing mother who literally, she taught me how to weightlift. right? And I had an extremely hardworking dad who was, you know, a really good high school wrestler and football player, and like he taught me how to wrestle, and so like I got raised to be tough, you know, to be
Mm-hmm.
to not roll your shoulders back, pick your chin up, work hard, and all those things. And so I think I benefited from having great parents and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. What, when we have children, the natural inclination is to protect them and raise them in a certain way. And it can be hard kind of writing that
Mm,
line of how much do I let them do alone and how much do I allow them to struggle, because that
hmm.
struggle, I know, because I've talked to so many, like hundreds of people who tell me the same thing, right? So I know with my sons,
Yeah.
I watched my son the other day. We were out kind of like walking in the woods, and he wanted this pine cone. This is an aside. We'll get back to the story, I promise. He wanted this pine cone, and it was like just out of his reach. And I'm not far from him, but he
Yeah.
started jumping to get this pine cone, and it was like 10 times. And I could hear him talking to himself, and he wasn't getting it, but I just let him go, like he wasn't hurting, you know what I mean? And you feel like
Right.
he's small, you want to help. This is just a stupid little example of the bigger concept, but you're like, I could easily get that. Here you go, here's a pine cone, is that what you want? Okay, now you have it, let's go. No, like I was just in it, just in it to watch it. And I feel like that's a small
Yeah.
example of what you're talking about, just this ability to gain confidence and competence about your own
Hmm.
ability, independently. And then that
Hmm.
leads you, it grows and it allows you to do really amazing things. So you talked a little bit about not having choice, and that's why you joined the military and your sense of adventure. Um, so
Yeah.
did I miss anything? And
No,
your friends,
no,
I guess, your
you nailed that
friends.
astutely. And me in my 20s, there I was. That was my binary capability before my
I,
prefrontal cortex
man,
came
I,
online. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love that we can't predict where we're going to go in the future. Um, how how do you think about your experience now? Extremely broad question, but
Mm.
what experiences come to mind when you think about um, the 20 plus years that you served?
The immediate thing that comes to mind is just gratitude. Just
Mm,
grateful I was
mm,
able to do it, and and to be realistic but not dramatic. Grateful I survived some of it. Um, Grateful I got to meet some of the most amazing, most intelligent, physically gifted, like genetic freak people that America has. Um, some of whom are immigrants who became citizens while in platoons and
Absolutely,
on
for
teams
sure.
and are also amazing
Yes.
humans and Americans now. And it gives you, going to war gives you a worldview that cannot be replaced with anything else that is done in any other industry or job or experience. I mean, there's some really close relationships, obviously, with first responders of all types, and there's a shared understanding, but there is a visceral reality about the inner workings of psychology and culture that you can't get anywhere else than being in war. And I'm grateful that I got to experience those things. And now, as a middle-aged man, I hope that no one ever has to again. But that's not the reality of the world we
Mm,
live in. So be prepared.
no. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about the worldview? Like, what do you mean when you say that?
Um, I would say it would seem to me I'm really busy working on a big chunk of history right now.
Oh my goodness.
And going all the way back to going back to Egypt and really Sumeria, and then going all the way forward to about the time of Napoleon. And you start to see this pattern, this like kind of waveform pattern of civilizations rise and fall. Um, and I'm not, I'm only through just past like Assyria. Um, and what I'm starting to see, at least for myself, I'm not an academic, I'm not, doing a research paper or anything like that. But what I'm starting to see is the world is in a contentious, competitive, lack of communication space that is so filled with, and I'm going to use this word academically. I don't mean it in a slang way. It's so full of bullshit. There's a really good paper by Harry G. Frankfurt. We'll clean that up in the show notes. But that paper talks about why bullshit is more insidious than lying. Because you have to care about the truth if you're going to lie. But if you're bullshitting, you don't even care about the truth. You just care about getting what you want.
Right.
And if you look at the myriad of communication that's happening across so many different platforms, we're just swimming in bullshit. It's just people driving other people to get them to purchase something or get them to think away.
Right.
So all of that to say, it would seem to me it's a difficult time that makes transitioning really exponentially difficult in a different way.
Yeah. Yes. Difficult in a different way. If I forget, I want to get back to that. I think you're so right. What do you think for you was most challenging during your years of service?
I can only say this now with some deep contemplation under my belt, some meditation, and being middle-aged at 46. My ego, my addiction to alcohol, my addiction to anger. Those were by far my biggest challenges that impeded me in my ability to be a better teammate, to excel even further potentially in my career. Yeah.
I mean, I have about 100 questions about that, but I think people can see a little bit, right? Like how anger would get in the way of you being a good teammate, how alcohol would degrade your performance across the board, even though it's used a lot in the military culture. Can you talk a little bit about the ego part?
Sure. Ego can show up in a lot of different ways. And at least for me, the first way I usually used to think about it was it could be a very, not a passive ego, but a very active ego where it's like, look at me, the puffery, the I'm going to be the best because I want to beat everybody and all of those things. There can also be a passive ego in my mind where it's dwelling on the self and you care more about looking cool than doing what's right. You care more about how you're perceived than the quality of who you actually are. There's another really interesting piece of work done by an author whose name I forget, which is unfortunate. But at some point in the 1950s, marketing went from talking about being a man or woman of character to being a man or woman of interest. So it's more important to be interesting than to be a man or woman of character. And think of the implications of that. And I've lived that. Right. I've tried to be interesting at times instead of being a man of character, and I've paid for it.
Yeah. How have you paid for it?
It's harmful to myself, starting with the most basic, most important relationship, the relationship with the self. It's harmful to and then if you work in concentric circles out, it's harmful to every relationship that you're a part of, that's in your sphere of influence, because you're not showing up authentic. You're not showing up being the most purposeful, useful version of you. It's in there, right? You're not saying you was a terrible person or any of these things, but could I have done better? Was there plenty of opportunity to do better? Absolutely. And I see that now.
Yeah. How did you figure that out? Like, how did that come to you? Were you given feedback or? I mean, you mentioned it was reflective and, during kind of, meditative almost.
I think a few things kind of came together at the same time for me. Is I took meditation seriously for the first time, combined with taking reading seriously, and I mean reading material outside of the like Commander's read list and those things, which there's nothing wrong with those. I
It's a great
wasn't a
start. It
reader back
is. Yeah,
then.
for sure.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
Many of those books are really good books, but really delving into I mean, these I'm talking about existential questions that have been grappled with since the beginning of writing, right? The Greeks, all of
Right.
Western culture. I mean,
Right.
and then when you start looking at that, what are the contemporary works? Well, you have all the great religions coming online kind of at the same time. Why? I mean, that's a great question to ask yourself at some point. And then how do they interflect with each other? And as I was digesting all of that and reading a ton of history and seeing how it kind of weaves its way through, I kept seeing this opportunity of I'm not being the best I can be. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
showing up
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
with my full potential. And what the craziest part for me has been is it's never been about me. The point of being the best
Mm-hmm.
you isn't about you. Whoa,
Right.
wait, what?
Right. Right.
The point
Love
of
it.
being the best
Yes.
you is that you can show up with capacity for others.
Right.
And once that
Right.
clicks, you've walked through a door that you can never walk back through, and you view the world much differently.
Right. That's so
And
good.
I
You
had
know,
great grandparents, and I had great uncles and others who tried to teach me that, but it didn't click until easily the last 5-ish years.
yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that, the assessment and selection for these top tiered units has in the past few years
Mm,
become to focus less on the performance and more on the character. And I think it's because we're learning, right? Um, from
hmm
from men and women like you who are looking back and saying like, yeah, we did awesome, but we could be better. Um,
hmm
and better in the sense
hmm
that you just described. So, and that's hard. It's relieving
hmm
and it's difficult all at the same time because it's relieving to say I don't have to be anyone
hmm
I'm not. I mean, I can always try my best, but I don't have to pretend, right? Um but then
hmm
it's
hmm
terrifying because it's like, well, how do you develop real true never going to go
hmm
away when you're faced with a hard decision alone in the dark or facing a real enemy character.
hmm
So, anyway,
hmm
I love
And
that you
what
brought that
part
up.
of you doesn't fit that, and you need to cut it away?
So
Mm,
scary.
that's difficult. Hmm
Yes. Love it. But it's exciting too. It's well, and I think, terrifying
hmm
things they can be exciting. um, okay.
I'm in the right
You
place.
are now we've kind of been talking about your military experience. But you're now a part of, and you have been for quite a long time, an incredible organization that aims to help veterans in many ways. So tell us all about how you
hmm
came to serve with the Honor Foundation.
Yeah, I knew that my transition was I was coming to the end of my 20 years, and it was looking, as the closer I got to 20-year mark, that was going to be the end for me.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I were prepared for that decision, and it was feeling more and more likely to be the best decision for us and all of those things. Because at some point, for me, as I was showing up slightly not as early as I used to, a little bit disheveled, maybe a little bit hungover from last night, swiping my badge, trying to get my phone into the box, get to the computer, and then make it to the first meeting on time. And then my ramp up of medical appointments, I started really asking myself the hard question: are you now part of the problem
Right.
as a staff
Oh,
guy? And
right.
I couldn't answer. I couldn't look myself in the mirror anymore and say definitively I was not. So that really helped me make the decision. It was time, because a bigger, faster, stronger, smarter version of me that needs the opportunity, and it's time. So those things kind of came together, and I knew it was time for me. So, looking at it predictively, I kind of started my own transition about 2 years out. And I just doing what I could on the weekends, doing what I could in the evenings, started reading differently and consuming different material. And then I heard about the Honor Foundation. So I went through it as a fellow. So I'm an alumni of the course, Group 15 in San Diego. And I had done a bunch of different things up until that point. I had been to, there's a lot of Americans who are doing great work in the transition space. It's not totally effed, like everyone says. Like there's really good stuff out there. Doesn't make it any easier necessarily. It's still really hard, but there's good people doing good work that you don't even hear about. But then I showed up at the Honor Foundation and I was completely blown away. And it's like showing up at selection. Oh, I may not actually be ready. Like this is a different experience. I showed up as ready as I could be, but this is really testing me. Because they didn't start with resume and LinkedIn and those things. They asked me to think about myself. I'm like, no, I don't want to. And that's pretty much what every guy does the first couple of weeks.
Next question, please.
But then as you go through it, next question, that doesn't apply to me, obviously, swipe left. Yeah. So I was really... again, I'm grateful and I feel very fortunate to have gone through that and experienced it. And when I was offered the opportunity to stay as a staff member, I leapt at it. And so I've literally been there ever since. Spent the last 5 years helping thousands of special operations veterans transition and do so. Look, transition gets talked about primarily in one way, and it's a big, long checklist of figure out your VA, figure out how to get out of, big Army, big Navy, big Marine Corps, big, whatever service branch, get out of your unit. There's a bunch of big checklists. And then you've got a whole checklist for job stuff and a whole checklist for insurance and a whole checklist for it. And look, that is change management. That's actually not transition. They are necessary steps that are one and done that did that, check the box. And they're necessary. Like you have to do it. You should do it well. You should do it the best you can. But that is not the transition. And what was availed to me through the curriculum with the Honor Foundation was it's about identity, community, making sense of the world, purpose, and meaning in life. And those are the things that don't happen on a checklist. They don't happen overnight. They may not happen in 3 months. And I'm 5 years into it. And I'm just now figuring some shit out. So if you're in transition and you just started, you've got a ways to go. Yeah. It doesn't end just because you check the block on the VA. There's more to go.
Right. There's so much to say about it. We've been going through our own transition. My husband, retiring from the Army, and we're 2 years in, and I'll say thank you, but we're still figuring it out. And I helped stand up a transition program that was about the things that you're talking about, the deeper things. And it's still a process. I'll just say that. Like it is exciting, but it's also scary. I think when you are laying down, that part of your life, you do want security. For the first time, you feel like you don't know where your next paycheck's going to come from, and fear causes a whole different set of behaviors than excitement and hope. So I feel like that is what your team is bringing to the table. But you have a ton on your plate. You're very busy. I mean, you and I'm sure your whole team, you continue to push the limits. And we're going to talk about one of those things that you guys are pushing out here in a minute. But to bring it back to you, though, what keeps you going during the tough times and like still ready, willing, available to serve?
I think it's a combination of waking up every day and jumping right into being grateful for the first thing that it lays my eyes on in the morning. through having a team that I currently work with that is much like being on a special operations team. I mean, we are moving at the speed of trust, and we're doing it from on all three coasts, East Coast, West Coast, and down to Florida. And and now in the central United States and Kentucky, and Tennessee, and we're moving fast, and it's because everyone is extremely talented, driven, and is trying to set the bar just a little bit higher because of that friendly competition. And we all care more than I can tell you about the individual fellow who comes in on night one like this.
Exactly. Love it.
And then leaves
perfect posture, arms
on
crossed.
graduation like, oh my God. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the transformation that happens just in the 3 months, that makes it really easy to wake up. And it doesn't matter with the aches and the pains and the mortgage bearing down on me and all the other things of life. Like I'm surrounded by really good people on my team, and I'm just grateful, and it fuels me.
Can I ask you a question about gratitude? You've mentioned it several times. Was that something that came natural, or like, how did you find that?
My grandmother, who was extremely influential, from when I was knee high to a grasshopper, she would read the Bible in the morning and say, Mikey, what are you grateful for? And I didn't understand how important that was way back when, right? Skip forward 3 decades where I've stopped doing that. And then as I started getting into my own meditation practice and listening and kind of expanding my comfortability with other ways of taking care of yourself, yoga and other things, the realization that how good it feels almost instantaneously to just say, I'm grateful for this conversation right now. As challenging as it might be, I'm really grateful for this. And all the other things that cascade or stem from, and how it can just change your mind. And in some way, kind of like we all know intuitively, it's like sear. Everything's like sear. You got to get small victories and keep moving forward.
I'm wearing my sear shirt today. Yes. Shout out to sear. I know. It's such a... It's true. Those small victories, it changes everything. And your perspective changes your behavior. And that changes your day. Yeah. And that changes your life. And it changes other people's lives. So thanks for diving into that. Mm-hmm. Another aside that I feel like was really important. And when I say we, really, I mean people like Trey Free, like at these top tiered units are now new operators. We're trying to teach them the power of gratitude. Like, before you find it in the depth of your despair, you know what I mean? Start using it now. So, okay, I'm going to get back on track now. Tell us about Vector Accelerator, if you will.
Yeah, so Vector Accelerator. So the Honor Foundation has been around about 10 years as of this recording. We've always known, and it's always been in the design of the Honor Foundation to be able to scale the appropriate piece of curriculum to all veterans in transition, the 200,000. And what we're endeavoring to do with Vector Accelerator is bring it to market at scale and do it in such a way that is not diluted, because we know that we have to go online. The problem with our demographic, all veterans, is we've done so much online training. We're used to going click, 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 click. Got my certificate. Right. Here you go.
Fast as possible.
SEA. Right. Leave me alone. I'm cybersecurity certified. I didn't learn anything. Right. I don't know really anything except for maybe not click on this. But I went through it as fast as I could, and so we've been very thoughtful about that. But how do we help people really grapple with the existential questions that I mentioned earlier? Yeah. You're going to lose your identity. You're going to lose your community. The world is not going to make sense to you, and it's going to happen rapidly, and it's going to leave you disoriented and untethered. And then you're going to call into question your own purpose. What does your service even mean? How do I carry that forward? What do I carry forward from it? And all of that calls into question, what is the meaning of my life or the life in general?
Right.
And that's why we find our brothers and sisters in the most dangerous time of their lives, even including combat, I would think. I don't know. I haven't done the actual math
Statistics
on that,
would say yes.
That is why suicide rates are so high in transition. Yeah.
That is.
So we're trying to bring that in such, to really help everyone grapple with that. All veterans grapple with that in a meaningful way so that they feel supported and can now move forward with the rest of the things, that necessary change management checklist that is done in a way that is intentional, they're not just seeking any old job because they're two kids,
they just
a
need
mortgage
a paycheck,
is bearing
they're
down
desperate,
on them on the first.
Yeah.
So we're trying to change that narrative. Yeah.
I think you will end up saving lives. There's so much that the average service member doesn't get access to. We started the conversation talking about people in special operations, and they all deserve a good transition program because it's different. You're right. It's not just a checklist. What you mentioned earlier in our conversation, transitioning now being difficult in a different way. So now I want to dive into that. What did you mean by that?
Yeah. So if you look at, we'll just go back to, say, World War II era transition through literally today. What you had during all the time periods previously was a very set, known world at a minimum. The world stage was set. There's only a couple of superpowers. Global norms are as such. There's not a lot of things in question. And the further you move forward, especially it accelerates after Vietnam, and especially once you enter GWAT era. And then you couple that with AI and all the other like technologies that are coming online, the biotechnologies that are actually scaling faster than Moore's law, which we don't see the implications of yet because they're not out in the public space like a phone or like the headphones you and I are wearing right now. It's affecting us in a very different way, and it's going to feel like overnight when CRISPR really does change the face of humanity, or some other gene editing technology. So if you add all of these things together, plus you add, there's no longer the global norms are being contested across multiple spheres. If you're looking at just the United States and the strength of the economy, especially over a historical period, that is in question for the first time in a very long time. So, and then you just pile on the natural existential questions that we've been talking about, and it exponentiates the complications of all of it. And then you add the misinformation and bullshit that I mentioned earlier as well through all of the social media means. And it's very hard to weed your way through to find signal from noise, what is truth.
Yes.
And at almost every level. So it adds to it.
Finding signal from noise. That's so good. Okay. We could go on forever. What's the best way if people are interested in Vector Accelerator specifically, or Honor Foundation, or even trying to reach out to you, Halty? What's the best way to do that? What should they do first?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I would say LinkedIn is, I'm going to say LinkedIn first just because it is the most powerful platform in human history, oh, by the way, to make connections with other professionals, like real, genuine connections. It hasn't been completely invaded by bots yet and all the other problems, although they're there. It's not perfect. But if you really want to get real transition work done in terms of that big, long checklist and some other things, that's the best place to start. Once you're on there, if you're in special operations, go to honor.org, follow us. If you're If you're one of the rest of the military veteran force, vectoraccelerator.org is a great page to follow, and start tracking that information. We'll start updating that here shortly. And then Michael G. Halterman, I've added my middle initial to differentiate because there's always lots of Michaels. I'm happy to connect with any veteran, any first responder, talk about transition, spouses who don't get a lot of airtime. You all deserve a great transition, and it's not only good for you, it's good for America. So I'm all in on it.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. This is going to be my last question. I think I hold the right to ask more questions, but here it is. So if someone listening to your story from beginning to end, and they're sitting there, they feel a call to serve, right? They feel this urge to do something bigger, or be a part of something bigger, make an impact, make a difference, but they don't know where or how to get started. What is your advice for them?
Pay attention to that urge. You will inevitably have a lifelong regret if you don't. Not all service looks the same. You can serve in your community if that's the capacity you have. You can serve at many different levels. Schools need us. Many of our public institutions need us. It doesn't have to be in uniform necessarily. But I will say, if you're a young gentleman and you're in reasonably good shape, or you could get in reasonably good shape if you got your ass off the couch or out of your parents' house.
That's all of you.
And you put in some real effort. It is the adventure of your life. And if you don't do it, you will have some of the deepest regrets at the end of your life if you don't at least try. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
It has been an honor having you on the podcast, and I look forward to all of the great things that you continue to do within your means and on your team, and super excited about this new program that's like involving everyone. When you say 200,000 people, I mean, like, that just gives me chills, and it's about time. So it's awesome. Anyway, thank you for your service back in the day, and thank you for your service now, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Barb. Very grateful for this opportunity.
We did it. Under 40.
Yes. Nice. That felt awesome. That was the first time I got to talk about some of those subjects, and that's the stuff I really want to talk about. So I